Nonviolence section. The War on Nature as the highest stage of violence. A society's violence is also manifest in its relationship with nature. Psychological warfare would not be complete if it did not also encompass this dimension, especially in an era of acute ecological sensibility. Let us attend to the Dalai Lama. Quote, "Prior to the Chinese invasion, Tibet was an unspoiled wilderness sanctuary in a unique natural environment. What little is left in Tibet must be protected, and efforts must be made to restore the environment to its balanced state." End quote. And now let us give the floor to a successful British historian, often a guest in the most distinguished U.S. press organs. Quote, "Today, the Chinese seem to be engaged in fighting nature." End quote. The damage done to the environment in the great Asian country is not the price to be paid to save hundreds of millions of human beings from underdevelopment and hunger, and not even the result of errors in political economy. Instead, we are dealing with, quote, "a regime openly in conflict with nature and engaged in a strange war." End quote. So Lamist Tibet embodies nonviolence as a result of religiously respecting nature as a whole, along with the life of every sentient being. On the other side, the War on Nature, such is the title of the article, is the concentrated expression and most senseless manifestation of violence. Let us now turn to the speech by the Dalai Lama, leader of the Tibetan government in exile in India, delivered before a Human Rights Committee of the U.S. Congress. It is the 21st of September, 1987. Less than 3 years earlier, in the night of 2nd to 3rd of December 1984, in India, at Bhopal, what was perhaps the most serious ecological catastrophe in human history occurred. Its protagonist was the Indian subsidiary of Union Carbide, a multinational specializing in agricultural fertilizers and pesticides, with its headquarters in the United States, the country that listened, moved to the denunciation of crimes against the environment attributed to China. Just as he repressed the disaster of Bhopal, which according to some estimates resulted in 15,000 to 20,000 deaths, and whose long-term impact was still causing casualties at the time he gave his speech, so the Dalai Lama observed silence on another ecological catastrophe that had occurred in a country which, a little over 10 years earlier, had fallen under the iron grip of the United States, following a coup d'etat that had prompted a veritable bloodbath. In the words of a U.S. historian of Indian origin, quote, "Collusion between mining companies and the Indonesian army in Indonesia led to appalling pollution of rivers," end quote. And that is not all. Beginning of long quote. In 1977, the fires lit on Sumatra to clear vast areas of vegetation from the brush produced a toxic cloud so large it covered Malaysia, Papua, New Guinea, and even some areas of Australia, as to impel the Malaysian government to declare a state of emergency, and even to ask religious figures to pray for rain. Thousands of newborn babies died of asphyxia, and $10 billion of revenue came to nothing. End quote from Parag Khanna. The two examples given of actors in the War on Nature are countries particularly committed to supporting the cause of the Dalai Lama. However, the tendency to Manichaeanism is inherent in the ideology of war, which consequently represses essential facts. With a surface area slightly larger than that of the United States, China has a population 4 times greater, and, with 1/7 of the available arable land, must feed 1/5 of the world's population. If China has reached or slightly exceeded the United States as regard the total level of emissions, this means that an inhabitant of the former country pollutes only 1/4 as much as an inhabitant of the second. Separate treatment would be required of pollution deriving from the massive military deployments and veritable wars conducted by the country that likes to reprehend China for its war on nature. Furthermore, although confirming the gravity and urgency of environmental problems in the world's most populous country, which is engaged in a process of industrialization and urbanization of unprecedented rapidity, authoritative voices have nevertheless drawn a much more nuanced picture of the Beijing government's policy in this area. It has, quote, decreed that cities dramatically expand their green space, end quote. The impetuous development of automobile traffic exacerbates congestion and urban pollution. But these problems have not remained without a response in China. Quote, many of its big cities will soon have the most advanced rapid transit systems in the world, end quote. The struggle to improve the environmental situation is in full swing. Quote, contemporary China not only imposes fines on those who do not respect the environment, but also stigmatizes them socially, putting them on a, quote, blacklist of big polluters, end quote. Moreover, China is actively engaged in renewable energies. Quote, its employment of solar power for heating water is superior to that of any other country in the world, with technologies that are already sold abroad, end quote. And that is not all. Let us once again give the floor to a U.S. author. Quote, green innovation is starting to mushroom in China. Wait a decade, and we'll have to import our green technology from Beijing. Green China will be much more challenging than red China. As green technologies get adopted here and gain scale, the Chinese will set the standards for the world, end quote. But is it true then, as the Dalai Lama claims, that in the good old days Tibet was an ecological and environmental paradise? He himself lamented, quote, the universal dirt and the wretched sanitary conditions, as a result of which many lives are lost needlessly in epidemics. Ultimately, altitude alone averted catastrophic plagues, end quote. Now, on the same subject, let us attend to a contemporary historian. Beginning of long quote. By all accounts, the task of keeping Lhasa clean must have been Herculean, for the city could have rivaled the worst present-day metropolis for its filthiness. Garbage was strewn everywhere, and it was common practice for people to relieve themselves anywhere they pleased. Dead animals were said to be a familiar sight. So bad was it that the 13th Dalai Lama was, almost always, sick from the smell and the dirt. The nobility routinely carried around scented handkerchiefs for their noses as they rode through the capital streets. End quote. It was also on account of this disaster, which did not spare the health of the 13th Dalai Lama, that in Lama's Tibet, according to Herrer's calculation, quote, the average expectation of life among the Tibetans is only about 30 years, end quote. As with ahimsa, nonviolence, and spiritual purity, so the environmental purity attributed to Lama's Tibet is a creation of psychological warfare, as is the war on nature attributed to China on the other side. End section.